And it is up to the police boss, it is up to the DPP to have those ones arrested, taken to court, brought to book, and let the protesters who are picketing peacefully continue. On the other hand, if you're talking about assessing Raila Odinga's protests because he has a history, Kenya's history and Raila Odinga are one. We are where we are today because of this man's efforts within every election from 1992, from the 1980s to the 2000s, and there has been progress into multi-party democracies. There has been progress into having such successful coalitions as the NAC coalition in 2002. Yes. He was part of them, and yes, it was through protest, it was through pushing the government, whether it was President Moi, whether it was President Kibaki in 2007, and whether it was President Uhuru Kenyatta in 2013, to have the voices of Kenyans heard in terms of government decision-making. So his contribution is not just violence in the streets. His contribution to this country is more than we will ever be able to account during this lifetime.
Yes. Have those people arguing that we do know exactly how your protestant been vindicated in what we've seen over the past, 2 mass protests now? Because when we're reporting, we don't know that already 2 people have lost their lives, and there have been property worth millions that have been destroyed within that entire period. I think some people look at it and say, but we told you, you see, they were never going to be peaceful. They are now, they've turned out into a riot and destruction of property. Are they going to be vindicated by what has happened over the past 2 days, over the past 2 mass actions?
We need to identify who is causing chaos. Because as early as yesterday, retired Chief Justice Willie Mutunga went live on Twitter and told everyone that he is of the opinion that it is not the protesters or the leaders of the protesters, being Raila and the rest, who are causing these issues. It is state-sponsored individuals who are being inserted into the protests and causing peaceful protests to turn chaotic. There can be 2 ways to look at this coin. It may be true that the simple face of it is that the violent protests are being caused just because there's a mass demonstration ongoing. It can also be true that in order to direct this conversation, people are being incited either by state sponsorship or by private individuals into these protests and turning these protests from regular picketing into chaotic picketing. Everything should always be given its due date in court, and yes, then once they have found out who the financiers are that they're saying are, whether it's President Uhuru Kenyatta, former President Uhuru Kenyatta, who they have not delivered any evidence for, Matthew, as to how he is financing these issues, all of this has to come to light. But as we all go into the sideshows of who is financing, why is it chaotic, what is going on, is anyone actually asking why are people demonstrating? Because that should be the main message.
That should be the main message.
And the secondary and third issues of criminal activities should be taken to court.
Somebody read into the arrest that happened on the first time that the protests started. The police did do a couple of arrests, and I'll point out to some of them who were arrested in Nairobi. In fact, the next day, they were released on a cash bail of 1,000 shillings and let to go. Is that the court making itself clear on where it stands as regards the legality and the unconstitutionality, or the constitutionality, therefore, of this protest? In the sense, we are clear what the law says, so we do not understand what we're getting involved. Is that it? Is that what you read into that?
The law is very clear on what charges can be brought against protesters, what charges can be brought against criminals, what charges can be brought for defacing public property, for causing damage to property, for theft. When you're taken to court, the court will only read the charge sheet as presented by the police and charge you accordingly. If the fine you're meant to pay, according to the penal code in Kenya, is 1,000 shillings, that is what the court will charge you. If the criminal activity you've done is, for example, theft, and there is no evidence by the time you're being brought to court, the court will release you. You are only brought to court on the strength of an investigation,
yes,
evidence adduced, and a case brought against you into that courthouse. Courts will not haphazardly use draconian ways to try and put people then under the table. Yes. That would be the judiciary operating as a state organ and as a voice of the state. And the judiciary is an independent voice in this issue.
Yes.
They are not politicians. They are not going to assist the state to control the protesters. They're not going to assist the protesters to go after the state. They are going to stand by and impartially assess and adjudicate on whatever is going on after it is brought to them.